Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome, everybody. We're here to help you out if you know somebody who has autism, or maybe it is in your family. And we've got an expert on that. And so gratified to have Alicia Trautwein with us. How are you today, Alicia?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Now, I consider you very special because you started a website and just a whole movement after dealing with it in your family. And it's called themomkind.com. And it's a resource for parents to go with children who have autism or may think their kids have autism, adults who have autism. You're kind of a trailblazer in that way in starting that revolution to get the information out there and to be a resource for parents. Thank you for doing that, by the way, because I don't see anybody doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
It's super cool. Today, we want to talk about why more people aren't being diagnosed with autism than we think they should be. And you're totally plugged into the research and everything that goes behind it. Why don't we start there about what's going on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of change, a lot of doctors understanding that there is an absolute gender bias. There's also bias within persons of color in the Black community, things like that, that they're not getting diagnosed properly at all, with lack of resources to even get to the doctors in the first place. And they're starting to finally understand and listen to autistic voices, as well as, parents with actual autistic adults that are saying, hey, this is what's happening. There are more women out there that are, being diagnosed. There's an underdiagnosed population or misdiagnosed. And, a lot of it really starts back to the beginning of, nobody likes to talk about them for various reasons, obviously, but, we have back, you had Hans Asperger and Dr. Keene, and they both were doing separate research studies around the world on autism, looking at it from different perspectives. But, we start there with this very biased view. Obviously, if you're thinking about the time period of Hans Asperger's, that's, unfortunately Holocaust time. And so there's this bias of who even would have autism to begin with, and then what that looks like. And then there was a very big separation between, it's gone through different names. It's gone through Asperger's, it's gone through high functioning, it's gone through, level 1 autism, but those who are verbal versus those who are nonverbal. And there's a really horrible separation between it because there's this view that autism is only one thing. It's either you're Sheldon Cooper's of the world, or somebody who is never going to be able to take care of themselves, nonverbal, has issues with bodily functions, things like that. And they don't see the in-between. And it's understanding that's a spectrum. And so it's really crazy how it's all developed too, because you look at it, back in the beginning of when we were doing the diagnosis criteria back in, earlier of the 20th century. And a lot of people now who are, autistic, they wouldn't have got diagnosed. There's just absolutely no way they would have gotten diagnosed based off the criteria.
Wow.
And as the years go by, I look at it from my own family's perspective. It's kind of funny, but so I have an older brother who was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I always wondered about that. He was diagnosed very young. He was diagnosed by 8. And this is, the late 70s. It's not a time period when obviously autism's even talked about much.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it, the next level of, the DSM, you have my little brother who's diagnosed then at, 10. And he's diagnosed with PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. So they abbreviate that to make it a diagnosis. And so you have these two things, but they were very similar. And then you finally get to DSM-5. And then that's where, my son was diagnosed. It's pretty clear because I could see the similarities between him and my brother very early on. But for my daughters and myself, we were able to get a diagnosis, not just with the DSM-5, but now with this movement that doctors are realizing they're looking at it from a very gender biased eye. And if you look back at it, you go through each one of their symptoms, they would now, if diagnosed now, my brothers would both have the same diagnosis I have.
Interesting. So over a period of time, I guess things came together.
Yeah.
in terms of
And so they realize it's not, they used to think, okay, it's these areas, these two two places, that's all it is. And then it got down to, okay, well, people thought it was like a line. When people think spectrum, they think of like the colors they see across their screen when you type in color spectrum, right? You see this color. And it's not, it's like think of it as like a wheel. I've seen a beautiful presentation. I forgot the young lady's name, but she did a great job of doing a color wheel like you would for like beauty school. Think about those ones where they, kind of match the colors, right? Well, it's a color wheel, and you have all these different, symptoms per se, and where your needs are vary so much person to person. So someone might be, you have this purple zone for repetitive behaviors. Well, somebody might be really high on that and really low on, other person low on it, but then it can flip in another area, or they got very similar things. And so doctors are finally realizing that, but we're still in that transition period where there's still so many that still get missed, especially with girls. Research really has shown that even to this day, boys receive earlier diagnosis.
Why is that?
And honestly, it really comes down to when people think of autism, and I mean, and I say this from, someone who grew up with autistic brothers, and I, be autistic myself, but like, I didn't see it from that perspective then. But like, you look at it from, oh, they like trains. It's the wheels, that's their view. Okay. So the doctors were looking for, are these kids, really obsessed with trains and really obsessed with dinosaurs? And that's well, girls play with those things. That's a very boy related topic, right? When you're looking at how they behave. And all of the criteria really is based off of what, a young white boy would do, what his resources are, what's those things that he's going to be highly interested in. And it wasn't looking at girls in any capacity. And it's still that way. And one thing I find, they found a lot of things I think are neat, that when they looked at what, everyone's special interests were, that, the ones that were the boys were the more typical what you thought of, where the girls' things were more socially acceptable. So like a boy might, really know his vacuums and know that that's a Bissell and he can tell you exactly what kind it is and all these different things, right? That stands out to you. That's a little different, right? A girl knowing every single Barbie and having, 200 Barbies in her room. Yeah, you might think it's a little excessive, but you're going to think it's socially acceptable because that's what the little girls do. They have a whole box of Barbies, right?
Sure.
And you don't think of it, they don't think of it in the same perspective, but it's the exact same thing. It's just, what are those, gender portrayed roles that the kids are being presented with, and then what they're playing with. My daughters, I mean, yeah, they have lots of Barbies, but that's because there were 3 daughters at one time. But, I look back and I think about my youngest daughter, and man, she would collect rocks, all these different rocks. She'd find a pretty rock, and my kids also do this, but they, find a pretty rock, or, the little spiky ball seed things that fall off the tree, little things from nature. And she collected all these nature things. And so that was a thing. Then there was a while she drove me crazy with it, but she would collect toilet paper rolls. And they would, and honestly, she was looking for it for crafts, a lot of it. But when you look at that from the viewpoint, like, well, girls do crafts, that's normal. Picking up rocks was a little different, but that, okay. But it was that fact. She was learning about it. She was wanting to know all the information about, why this rock is this way, where did this come from? There's a deeper level of it, but it still fell into the almost socially acceptable view of what a little girl should be. And it wasn't until behaviors came.
That's what a diagnosis, or the beginning point of a diagnosis, begins with what a child is into.
Yeah. Wow. And they know, because like little boys, you have and there are certain obviously extremes where, like with my son, where I I had a little bit different experience just because I looked at it from the eyes of, I was 12, 13 when my youngest brother was born. And so I watched him grow up, from day one, holding him as a little baby, watching his movement, things like that.
Yeah.
So when my son was born, day one, I noticed symptoms. And it wasn't much, but I noticed that he was so similar. Like everything matched with my little brother, besides just looks, because the family runs through. But he was a breastfed baby, and there was no eye contact. he didn't smile. I have a video. He did not smile until he was 10 months old. He didn't really start really giggling, laughing until he was well into his twos. And so there were things that were very clear for him, whereas the girls, we knew something was wrong. And that's what a lot of parents are saying that have girls that are diagnosed later on. They've been to doctors and over again until they finally find somebody who's willing to understand, like, oh, this is a girl with autism. I can look at it from that perspective. And, another thing that I've seen, with research and talking to people as well, is that doctors they'll pick out the comorbid things. So the things that commonly come with autism can be things like ADHD, anxiety, depression.
Right.
And they'll look at it and say, oh, well, that's anxiety. It can't be autism because it's anxiety. And they kind of singular focus on the other things instead of looking at the perspective of this is anxiety, kind of directly connected to their autism. And so they'll work with them on the, anxiety, because you can give a pill for that, right? You can prescribe a medication, send them, and then they'll be back in a month, they come back and they come back. And I'm not saying every doctor's doing it for medicine, for money, but I'm just, it's simple. It's a simple solution. They have set things they give kids.
What an interesting point that you bring up there, because it's almost the path, and I'm not taking anything away from any doctors, but it's almost a path of least resistance where, all right, you know what? Let's look at the ADHD thing and we'll circle back on the other side. And then to your point, doctors, they're trained to fix. So, all right, here's medication for you. I just want to tell everybody we are talking to Alicia Trautwein, and she is a autism advocate. She's the director of the Mom Kind. It's a not-for-profit organization, and it's the momkind, KIND.com. You are so kind for doing what you do. I got to tell you that. Instant feedback, if you want to check in, it's instantfeedbacksteve@gmail.com. I want to share with everybody, we shared it last week. Actually, you did. You found out later in life that you have autism.
Yeah.
And I had to ask you, based on everything we're talking about and the research and how it's kind of catching up with 2022, but we're still way behind in terms of diagnosing. What was your moment where you thought that, yeah, I think I'm autistic. I think I am.
So a lot, and this is something I hear from so many, especially women that go through this, is that I found out, I really started to get confirmation as I started going through the process with my daughters of getting them diagnosed. So my son, he was still, very young. He was diagnosed at 23 months. So I don't know what I acted like at that age, right? But with my daughters, I look back and, man, there was this one video of my daughter, and I can't get it out of my head ever because it was caught by accident. I was trying to record something. I think I was trying to take a picture of something, but my husband recorded. It was some weird thing how it happened. But we hear me say, my daughter's on a swing at this pumpkin patch place. We hear me saying her name over and over and over. I'm like, Lily, look this way. Lily, look this way, take a picture. Lily. And I kept doing it. And she never answered. She didn't answer to her name. But it never clicked to me that it was because she, it's the auditory processing. It was just, she didn't answer her name. Yeah. And I probably went through this all the time. And I remember, things like looking back, I remember my husband asking me one time, he's like, why do you keep saying it 3 times over? I'm like, what are you talking about? And I had no clue. And I don't remember what it was, but something I'd said, I repeated the word back to back. It was like a couple word sentence, but it was I repeated it 3 times every time I said it. And he caught it. And I'm like, that's weird. So, I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe I'm stressed, whatever. And then as we're going through the girls' diagnosis, I realized, I'm like, yeah, I behave the exact same way. Huh. And then finally, when we got our oldest with autism diagnosed at, 11, their doctor looks at me and she goes, so you said that you do a lot of these things when you were a kid. Have you ever been tested? And I'm like, no. She's, well, you might want to consider that. And, we had a good relationship. So it wasn't like a, step out of line thing. Right, it was just, I see 3 of your kids with autism. Like, come on now, lady. Like, here's, here's the picture. It's what she probably was thinking. Sure. But yeah, and it's crazy because, I look back and man, it was so clear. There's no question. I look back at, my entire childhood, the fact of, I didn't have really of imagination when I played with toys. It was repeating what I had seen. So if I had seen another child playing with a toy a certain way, I would play with it. And the toys that I was interested in was things that I could take apart and learn how to fix it and put it back together. I'd have cars. My dad used to get me all these, toy, model car kits.
Yep.
And I loved those because then I could see every single part going through. And, he showed me his old ones that he had from when I was a kid. And, I look back, I look at things like that, and I'm like, man, and like high school being so, middle school and high school is awful. I mean, everybody said that about, don't get me wrong, it's awful for everybody. But I look back, I'm like, no wonder I was so, anxious and depressed. It's like I was masking my symptoms because I was trying to fit in. And, they looked at it as a very broad picture. They looked at kids, people that have autism, people that don't. And all girls learn to mask to some way, to mask who they are, especially by high school, because you want to be socially acceptable. You want to fit in with the crowd.
Oh my
everybody
God.
wants to, like that whole, and so everybody's faking who they are, especially in high school.
Now more than ever. Now more than ever. How many girls are doing that in terms of their self-esteem and looking at videos and TikTok and I should look like that and I'm not, so you mask it. But I find it interesting, even you earlier in life, like taking things apart, putting them back together. I did that. My mom used to tell me I would grab every flashlight, even as a baby, and take it apart. I would, and I would, in my crib, I would move my crib so I can get in front of a TV so I could start taking the knobs off. A lot of that, kind of, I would think is normal, but I guess when you start connecting some of the dots along.
Right, exactly. And it was because things were looked at from an individual perspective as opposed to, the long, thing of why, the amount that I would do it, or the, social interaction to how much I struggled with that. And it's funny because I look back and like, I try to remember like all these random things I was diagnosed. My mom knew something was wrong too. She tried. She did her best to get me help. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many doctors I saw, how many blood tests I had, how many, EEGs and EKGs. I mean, all the stuff I had as a child. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And it's like, none of it was a physical thing. So they couldn't picture it. So they gave medications. One doctor told me I had conversion disorder.
Had what?
Conversion disorder. So conversion disorder, and and that's the worst part of it. I didn't even fully understand it as a kid when he diagnosed it, because I looked at it almost like, can't think of the term right now, but like I was like, that's a fake diagnosis. I felt like that. I was like, like you're not even trying, like, but basically saying that, whatever you are feeling, you're manifesting. So me being so exhausted was because I was so stressed out, or me having, seizures was caused by, how angry I was getting, and, basically saying my emotional dysregulation was causing physical symptoms. And it wasn't the case. Like I looked at it now, and I even look back at, how the diagnosis was back, for that time period, it doesn't match up. He was just throwing noodles at the wall, hoping it would stick,
Basically, they were telling you, oh, it's in your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, as a teenager hearing that, I mean, I was high school. I was 15, 16 years old. That's not a good thing for a child, somebody to hear when they're like, no, I just need help. That's not what this is.
Yeah.
And, the internet was coming around, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't the same access we have now. We can look up an autism checklist right now if we want to and get some ideas. Back then, that really wasn't the thing. The internet was there, but it was MySpace,
Right. We're getting instant feedback, and we had mentioned before ADHD, and you help people with a lot of different situations. ADHD is one of them. Kim is in Florida, and she says, I think my son, who is 14, may have ADHD. He can't focus on schoolwork, says he can't pay attention, but he doesn't have a lot of the other classic ADHD symptoms. And then she says, could it be a mild form?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. There are different things. And what a lot of people don't understand too is that they look at it from the views of, back when, we were kids, it was diagnosed ADD, right? It was either ADD or ADHD, right? They're presented differently. And now it's one diagnosis. And it's one of the things where you don't realize, like the anger outbursts that kids will have, at that age. The exhaustion. A lot of times you'll think, oh, it's a teenager, they're growing, but no, they're so exhausted from trying to keep up. They're smart, and when they focus on a video game, you're like, oh, they're focused all the time. And at school, they're not focused. Well, yeah, but there's so many things going on around them, and there's kids talking, and you have to figure out, computers now and Zoom and all this stuff. And their focus is different. And that's one of the things I definitely would recommend going online, getting an ADHD checklist, a
Okay.
current one, and just looking through the symptoms. And if I'd say even, you think a third of these, match up, I would definitely talk to a doctor because they will look at it more. They're going to question, deeper thought process of how like it's presenting in that person. And so, ADHD, it presents just like autism, it's still on a spectrum in and of itself. I mean, certain people, yeah, there's the hyperactivity, there's the, I can't stop fidgeting, I gotta move. But then there's also the people that are, so focused that they can't be interrupted with anything around them. And so it presents so differently. And I didn't even realize anger was a thing about it until I think my oldest was like 10 by the time I found that out. Because the same thing, I thought it was, oh, he's hyper, he can't pay attention. That's what they're allowed, that's ADHD. That's all you think of. You don't think of the, the anger or the disconnect or even the, auditory processing seems to be in there a lot too. And that, the calling of their names. It's not just autism, even though autism and ADHD definitely overlap, a lot of these, neurodiverse diagnosis, there's things that do connect. So it's kind of hard to know where it is, what's going on. And at that age of 14, 15-year-old child, they're masking. Even boys mask. I mean, it's not to the level that girls do, but boys still want to fit in. Now, the difference is how it affects them when they mask. So a lot of times boys, they mask, but when they get home, they're fine. They're just themselves. It doesn't stress them out. They just say, oh yeah, I do that so I can fit in.
Right.
It's like, my husband tells me about times like he went and walked over a nail because they were all doing it. But he was the one that I guess put too much pressure down and went through his shoe,
Yeah.
but he wasn't doing it because he was like, oh, this is the coolest thing. It's just everybody else was doing it. But when he gets home, he's not trying to walk on nails, right? Whereas a girl, it's such you have to think about every single thing that you do before you do it and hope that you're doing it right. And so it puts so much stress on them that you can't really see the autism because you're just seeing who they're pretending to be. And that when they're home, they're stressed and angry.
And especially if you're talking about somebody who is 12, 13, 14, 15, now, puberty and going through lots of changes and all of that working at the same time. You really, Alicia, you brought up a really good point before when we were talking about Kim's instant feedback and her son with potential ADHD about being tired all the time. And I never thought about that. You think that, they're just tired, they're just lethargic, kids are just, they never sleep or whatever. But, your point is that because they're working so hard to fit in, mask something, it's exhausting. I never would have thought of that.
Yeah. And it's so much on them. And especially, like you said, at that age, it's one thing, not as good as an adult to mask either, but, it's one thing as an adult to do it. But it's a different thing with teenagers. They've got so much going on. And nowadays, they've got even more because when we were kids, while schools, sucked for us, it was awful. When we left that building, it was over until we walked back in that building, right?
Yeah.
Kids don't have that. They have constant feedback from Snapchat and everything else that, it's constantly somebody, and if somebody wants to pick on them or bully them, they have instant access to do that 24/7. There's no break from seeing these kids, from interacting with kids that could potentially be bullies, or even if they're not intending to be mean, but they're keep kind of pushing something that the child's already not comfortable with and it's still going and it's just never having a break. And I can imagine, I have teenagers and I still can't imagine what it's like to be a teenager nowadays because it was bad when I was a kid.
I know.
Now you have all that and I'm like, no wonder these kids are at the level they are.
And no digital detox because to your point, you come home and what are you doing? I'm on Google Classroom now. So now I'm still engaged in something or I'm playing video games. There's no, I don't want to sound old, but, go out and play baseball. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
It's been years since my son has played baseball. He's 15 now.
Oh, yeah. And that's one of the things, like my husband, that's what we got to do. My husband, our oldest that's still at home, we got her into playing, softball during the warm enough season. She can't handle extreme weather. So we do have to kind of navigate the, winter months with her. Getting to do stuff, but then my younger two, it's constant. I'm like, hey, you've been in your room for too long. Why don't you go outside? And humorously enough, we have chickens. We got them because of the pandemic. I had always wanted them because I knew we could have them. And, we're in a neighborhood, but we're unincorporated for the county. So we fall under county rules. husband never wanted it. It took 10 years. He saw my neighbor, my neighbor's got some, and he saw my kids just melt holding these little baby chicks. And he goes, fine. I'm like, fine, well, I can get them. I mean, I was out the door before. But, and so we got them, but the kids got to see this process, and it became this thing with them as well, that's their reason to go outside. That's their reason to go take care of the animals. They have to go collect the eggs. They have to help, interact with the animals, making sure they have their water. They get a kick out of learning the personalities because chickens, believe me, have a lot of personality.
Wow.
And the kids, so that's my thing. I'm like, hey, why don't you go check on the chickens? Why don't you go see how they're doing?
Are they still into it?
Oh yeah. They love them. The only thing is that I'm the one stuck with cleaning the coop. My husband's anti that, anti anything of the animals. He's like, you can have them, but I'm not touching them. Mm-hmm. And the kids, I don't trust them to clean it either.
I can't believe they're telling me that we're almost out of time. And I feel like we just started talking.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that crazy how that works?
You are so plugged into everything connected to autism, ADHD, and so much more, and just a resource. And I have to say it, like, I would never know that you have autism, and there's nothing wrong, obviously, with that. But you just that just takes you layers in a different direction because you get it, and especially with your family. How can you help people out going through the same thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, reach out to me. I have, I do have coaching on the website listed. Yep. Also on social media. I mean, it's one of those things where it seems like the craziest thing to promote anymore, but man, TikTok, because I always say if you have a question, ask it, because you're probably not the only one wanting to know that. And that's where a lot of my videos have come from. Even if they are 60 seconds, it's answering one question, but it gets so much, feedback because there's so many other people that wanted to know the answer as well.
Yeah.
Either one, I got free session on there if anybody wants to come see me.
That one little seed you might plant in somebody's head, and that could be the game changer, the light bulb, the epiphany that goes off. But yeah, you're there to help people out. I just want to run down real quick some of the things that you can deal with. So of course we have autism, ADHD. What else?
Yeah, I do a lot with, helping talk people through, the anxiety, parents, going through the process of getting your child diagnosed and then the aftermath of that, because there is a big emotional toll. And, it's one of those things where it's, you have the autism side, the person that's affected by it directly, but then you also have the family that supports them, that needs to know how to support them, but they also need to know how to take care of themselves, because you have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of your children, right? 100%. And navigating that's a lot, and it's hard because we're like, no, I don't have time to take care of myself. And that setting the times and setting routines, because routines help everybody, not just autistic individuals. And so a lot of times it's just helping parents kind of navigate those first few months after a diagnosis, or checking back in when they're teenagers, the teenage years, just kind of reevaluating, like, oh, what am I getting myself into when they go in the teenage years, and yeah. It's a lot. And so, just being a resource for parents that are, kind of going through it, for autistic adults as well, that especially those who are becoming, they found out their diagnosis late in life, like myself. It's a lot to take in, because then you have to review your entire life until that date, and you're starting to reflect back on that. And it's a lot to handle. And just having someone to talk to a lot of times, just to compare notes in a sense, really helps.
You are amazing. You're a doctor, a therapist, a friend, an advocate, all in one person. You can't get that anywhere. You have free consults, and you're there to help out. It's the Mom Kind. I'm going to spell it TheMomKind.com, themomkind.com. And Alicia Trautwein, so great talking to you. Again, I can't believe the time just went just like that. And just fascinating information. And just important stuff for a lot of parents and a lot of people going through a lot of the same thing.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yep, we'll talk to you next time. Hang tight. We will come right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down. I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.